Okay, everyone. Look, thank you very much for joining us for this presentation. It's a little bit different. I realise you're all sitting in rooms listening to this weird Scottish accent, disembodied voice on your PCs, and maybe you're sitting in a boardroom. But believe me, it's weirder from this end. Today's presentation is joint, two presenters online. You've got Stewart Little here, CEO of IRT Surveys, and on the line we also have John Llewellyn. John is from a company called Bauder, who are much bigger and more clever than us. I'll let John say hello.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for attending. Real pleasure to join you this afternoon. And as Stewart says, never been so nervous in my life. It's really weird sitting here imagining all your faces. So I usually at this point do say, if there are any questions, please shout out and have a go. Let's have I'll keep the window open to see what happens. But it's a bit like Eurovision too, slight delay. But yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you.
It's a little bit of a strange experience for everyone, but the point of today's presentation is just a quick introduction to both companies and to perhaps show you a new and fresh way of actually surveying roofs and detecting what is wrong with them and establishing a way forward. Very quickly, by way of introduction, our company is 11 years old. We're based in Dundee. We've got about 9 offices throughout the UK. We specialise in buildings, specifically energy within buildings. The 11 offices are actually all under franchising, but they're actually run by about 8 separate franchisees. And we've patented some pretty special software which you will see very, very shortly. John, I'm just going to hand over to you and you do your bit.
Okay, thank you. Don't know whether many of you have heard of Bauder. We're Europe's largest privately owned waterproofing manufacturer. Interestingly, we manufacture the waterproofing and the insulation components. So it's put together as a system rather than sourcing different materials from different manufacturers. It's interestingly a 3rd generation family business. Paul and Gerhard Bauder passing it down to the 4th generation as we speak. Actually, their sons now join the company. Over 700 employees. Lots of numbers there. Big turnover. 6 manufacturing facilities all over Germany. Although in the UK we primarily use the bituminous insulation products from Stuttgart and the single ply systems from a company in Leipzig, from a manufacturing facility in Leipzig, producing over 2 million square meters of membrane a week, which is quite scary when you think all that goes out onto European roofing every week. So that's where we come from.
Fantastic. Now, unfortunately for John, he doesn't have control of the screen. He's at my mercy for pressing buttons. It's in the hands of a man named after a mouse. Poor man. There's your next slide, John.
Right. Okay. Sorry, my screen went blank then for a second. In the UK, closer to home, we've got 2 divisions, one in the south, and I look after the northern division, including Ireland. We've over 30 area technical managers who go out looking at roofs and doing surveys on a daily basis. And when we do get a project to go live, hopefully, we've got 10 site technicians who look after the works on site. They do weekly inspections. They report back to you guys as clients with inspection reports, let you know what the progress is on site, any issues that we've come across, how we've addressed it. These guys also train the operatives on site or at Ipswich in our HQ, and we put that together with the largest technical department in the industry. So we're based in Ipswich, and that's a brief overview of what we do in the UK.
Okay, chaps, I did promise this would be about a 45-minute presentation, so I'm going to skip our experience. Suffice to say that we have done probably about 20 million square meters of flat roofing now. We do domestic and we do commercial, but we tend to do an awful lot of commercial buildings these days. It's where we started the business, and I'll let John tell you about what he does beyond a little bit of roofing as well.
Really quickly, we manufacture and supply lots of different types of flat roofing systems, from all the way through from bituminous products to single plies, liquids, the hot melt systems. We use a lot of that underneath our green roofs, which we're probably dominantly known for in the industry. On top of that, we use our own photovoltaic systems, but more importantly from this presentations perspective. We offer roof design advice and technical roof diagnostics. So that's what we're going to be looking into a little bit more detail now. And as I mentioned, once we've got all that in place and it's all right, projects on site are monitored using the site technician team.
Thanks, John. And I have to confess, I used to work with Bauder. I did what John did with Bauder many moons ago, about, oh crikey, about 17 years ago, and it was working with Bauder that was the trigger for me to actually set up IRT surveys myself, because I found a pretty slick way of doing it. So I do have a little bit of orange blood still in my veins from my Bauder days. I apologise in advance for that. But they're a good company, and that's why we invited them to join us in this presentation. So it's not meant to be a full-on sales presentation as such. It is supposed to be an educational presentation for you. We can send you all CPD certificates at the end as well, just to validate the hour. John, this is one of your slides as well, sir. If you could take us through this one, that'd be grand.
Thank you very much, Stuart. So when we're looking at existing roof build-ups, one thing that we've worked very hard on as a team is to find out exactly what's going wrong with that roof. Personally, I've come from a flat roofing background that's another 3 generations old, and I've been involved with lots of schemes where a new flat roof may have been specified, and installing that particular system, we found out that we're not actually addressing the problems. Problems mean elsewhere. So one thing that we really work hard on is to actually identify the problems and make sure that the new system and the new specification addresses all of those problems. That could be with the waterproofing itself. It could be with the insulation. As we're all aware, with new Part L regulations, insulation thicknesses are ever increasing, and it means that the effects of cold bridging or condensation issues can be dramatically amplified because of the increased thermal efficiency of the flat roof. So that's something that we also look quite closely at. Vapor control measures, sometimes overlooked as not that important in a flat roofing system and build-up, but believe me, without the proper vapor control measures, it can lead to condensation that then saturates insulation products and leads to quite serious problems, widespread problems. Then it goes down to the roof deck itself. There's the roof deck up to the new system that's going on there. Very important to identify what kind of roof deck we're dealing with. It also dramatically changes the specification, the type of approach that we need to take on that particular job. And more importantly, all of it is the new roof attached to the existing structure properly. And that's where the existing roof comes into its own. And I just want to round everything off there by saying we try to use a process of analysis that explores what's wrong whilst trying to reduce assumptions. So rather than assuming that that's okay, we want to try and specifically prove it. And thermographic surveys are a fantastic way of proving what we've got there. It's a more scientific approach to it. That's where I'd press my button for the next slide, Stuart, if that's okay.
Thanks, John. I'll tell you a very quick anecdote about John Llewellyn. When we were colleagues, I used to cut core samples and roofs and phone John and say, "Help, John, this stuff smells like rotten eggs." And he would say, "Oh, that's foam glass." And then I'd take another core sample and say, "This stuff looks like wet haggis." And he would say, "Oh, that's vermiculite, Stuart." John's been roofing since, I think you were 14, John? When you were starting
a little bit
business?
Before that, actually. Yeah, 12 years
before
old.
That.
The first time my father took me on a roof, yeah.
Child labour. So there's a nice picture that John took on a roof. It's beautiful. We've all seen roofs just like that, haven't we? It's been patched and overlaid and all sorts. So I guess who knows what's going on underneath there?
Well,
is the big question.
Can I cut in there, Stuart?
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting one here. This was a project that I became involved with probably about 8 years ago, actually. But it was a large scheme, 3,000 metre roof area, that had been repaired over a period of 10 years. And it was continually getting worse and worse and worse. And it's suffice to say that lots of contractors had been on that roof. And I dare say one or two manufacturers had had a look at it too. But nobody had actually identified what the problem was. They just continued to pour money at it, trying to repair that roof. And we'd calculated with the help of the facilities manager down there that there's been over £20,000 spent on trying to repair the roof. Interestingly, if somebody had gone up there and done a thermographic scan of that, it would have identified that the roof was wet all over the roof area. It was really interesting. And what was happening was that it was a metal roof deck, 13mm fiberboard, but there was no vapor control measure at all. And the building use had changed over the years, and humidity had increased within the building, which then led to condensation on the underside of the roof membranes that saturated the insulation. So the water was actually condensing underneath the membrane, running down the metal decking and dripping in on a low channel. So again, it was a great example of a thermographic scan would have identified this wet area on the whole roof and led to the conclusion that no, there's a serious problem on this, rather than trying to go up there and assume that they could patch repair it. So it's about taking that assumption away from it.
That's a common problem, isn't it, John, where people, when it starts to leak on the managing director's desk, they start looking for holes directly above the managing director's desk. And when you've got something like a metal deck, I mean, it can track 20, 30 metres across the roof after it's saturated. Did you say fiberboard on there, John?
Yes, 13mm fiberboard, yeah.
Nice big wet sponge absorbing it as well. Yeah. Every story tells a picture, huh? Every story tells the other way around. Every picture tells a story.
Yeah.
John, this is one of yours as well, sir.
Okay, the other areas where we've had great results using thermographic scans is trying to identify tracking water within systems. We all know that water will find the point of least resistance, and that can be 30 or 40 meters away from the source of ingress. So again, identifying that is a real tricky job, and thermography can help there. Condensation in cold bridges, I'm sure Stewart will be talking about it later. Any gaps in insulation can lead to condensation issues. They are really readily identified using thermography. Reversed falls, we're becoming more and more common. Roof areas are becoming more and more commonly installed now with tapered insulation, either to increase falls or improve back falls. And if you've got an existing concrete deck that has tapered insulation installed over it, you can get water that leaks through the waterproofing and runs the other way than the roof falls that are shown on the finished surface. I hope that's understandable over the telephone. So when you go onto a roof like that, you can try and identify the wet areas on the roof by taking core samples in low spots, but actually the water can be hiding under the thicker insulation on the higher points. So it's very, very hit and miss to identify where the wet areas of insulation are on tapered insulation projects with concrete roof decks that are uneven. Again, thermographic scans are fantastic in that instance. And overlaying existing compatible roof coverings, it's far more common now for everybody to want to save money and cut costs and find where the best value is. Overlaying an existing roof is a great way to do this, unless it's not compatible or it has a fundamental flaw within the existing build-up. So thermography, it's a scientific approach to prove the condition of what you've got there and identify where the wet spots are on these roof areas where you need to think about doing some additional works. So I'll hand back to Stewart. Thank you.
No, thanks, John. It's a good point about the reversed falls, because that is a very, very deep core sample you're having to cut if you end up with 300 mil of PUR. But you also see people taking core samples and not going all the way to the deck. You know, when they hit something that looks like concrete, they think, that's concrete, and not actually realise what they're looking at. I've got 3 slides to show you that hopefully will prove the point for infrared or make its case. You're looking at a roof which has to remain nameless for all sorts of reasons. It's on a shopping centre. You've got an air conditioning unit sitting there. You've got some services around. Visually, if you were looking at that photograph, does it look okay? Would you strip it? Would you think twice about it? Or would you just leave it alone and wait for a leak to happen? Is the question, the dilemma that all surveyors are faced with. When you switch on an infrared camera, what you see very, very quickly is literally the world in a different light. What you're looking at there is wet insulation in red and dry insulation in blue and purple. I do apologise if you're colourblind. Normally if I'm doing this in front of you, I touch it on the monitor so you can see exactly where it is. But that big red blob is wet insulation. But interestingly, it's coming from the white area, which is that air conditioning unit. So if you imagine maybe it's McDonald's who installed the aircon unit, but the leak is happening in Marks and Spencer's unit in the shopping centre, Marks and Spencer will be going crazy about it, and you as a landlord may bill them, say, hey, look, we've repaired the roof, it was your fault, and actually it's somebody else's fault. But also if you leave that roof unattended and you don't do anything to it, they tend not to get better by themselves. The water will just spread and spread and spread and continue spreading. But we live in a world where money is increasingly important, and we, particularly about this this webinar you're all dialed into, we kind of look at a different way of doing things. And in 2007 we wrote a piece of software that could take that photograph and turn it into this photograph that says, look, not only are you have a big problem and you're blaming the wrong person, you have a leak, you've got a maintenance issue, you're also wasting nearly half a tonne of carbon and £74.58. So if you imagine doing a huge roof and every single picture saves you £74, and then you start looking at the walls, we can actually give you a very, very compelling energy case to spend money maintaining the roof, which is a bit of a sideways way to do it, but it works very, very well. Now, John mentioned the importance of vapour barriers earlier. This is a fantastic photograph, says me. It's taken from the vehicle you see on the left. That's got a 21 metre pneumatic mast on the back. And what you're looking at is a school. You've got it butts up to a brick higher building on the north side of that visual photograph. And what you can see in the thermal image is, again, all the red, all the yellow, all the green is water that's coming behind the flashing on that roof. Now, the reason it's getting behind it is twofold. One is a kid climbed up on the roof and stole all the lead. And no, it wasn't in Liverpool, it was in Edinburgh. All the lead was stolen, but the vapour barrier isn't sealed correctly to the underlay. Therefore, that water can get right in and soak all the insulation. And John, I'll ask you a question. If you surveyed that roof without infrared, what would your advice be surveying it? Do you think you would find the water with cores, or what's your opinion?
Well, it's a good question. I think that our approach on every roof is to take a core sample at the high and the low points of the roof. So again, you're trying to determine lots of things, but more importantly, has the roof got falls in the roof deck, or is it in tapered insulation? And in this instance, and I'm not sure of this roof, Stewart, but if the outlets are on that lower part, we quite possibly would have taken a core sample at that point and then a core sample on the other side of the roof area. However, there's an interesting factor here on this thermographic image, in that there's a dip in the middle where the insulation is quite dry, quite close to the wall. So I wouldn't rule out the fact that we might have done two core samples there and may well have hit some water if we'd have done it in the right place on the left or the right of that dip, but quite possibly you could have missed it. So there's an argument to say there that the roof coverings themselves do look reasonable, and depending on the core samples taken, you could actually miss the fact that a lot of that insulation is saturated.
Yeah, it's a little bit 50-50, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the point of this webinar isn't to say, hey, infrared's the only way to go, and it's not to say, hey, core sampling is the only way to go. The point is to say, to learn everything you need to make an educated specification a good way forward. Ideally, you need to do both, and it's never a bad idea to get more information before you make a decision. With that in mind, just very, very quickly, we also offer a service called electronic leak detection. This machine, we've christened her Old Sparky because it basically is a brush that spits out about 40,000 volts through your roof. you earth yourself to the parapet, you sweep the roof, and wherever it finds a penetration, it can make an electrical circuit and it beeps and sparks. We call it Old Sparky because if you happen to be walking backwards and you bump into an air conditioning unit, you tend to get 40,000 volts right through your backside, and it makes your hair stand on end. It's a very, very low amperage. It's perfectly safe. Not if you're doing, petrochemical plants and anything like that. You're just not allowed that sort of voltage on a roof like that. But absolutely ideal for big, vast single-ply areas, felt areas, even asphalt. You can pick up little penetrations. So often it complements infrared, in that infrared is fantastic at saying, look at all the damage, you've got 82 square meters of wet insulation. ELD complements that by saying, and by the way, it came from 52 individual penetrations. And generally you can see them when they're all clustered together. You normally find little bits of metal that the cladding guy has left behind, or an air conditioning unit, or someone stood on a screw that someone's left lying. It's quite a simple, effective test. And it's not expensive. It's about £750 a day, and we can do about 4,000 or 5,000 meters in a day. So it's a pretty simple test. When to use infrared stuff? We generally get called in either in a conflict situation where a landlord and tenant are having a bit of a dispute. Maybe it's dilapidations, someone's moving out of a building, there's a change of occupancy, change of usage. But more often than not, we get, my building's leaking, the tenant stopped paying their rent, I need this problem to go away very, very quickly. Increasingly, we're getting involved with more and more architects saying, look, we need to specify this now. On completion, we want to instruct an infrared survey. That keeps everyone in the supply chain honest, because right from day one, they know that any gaps in the insulation, we're going to see them. Any water, any overlays, anything like that, we're going to catch them. And we've got some slides coming up where we've caught some cowboys by the proverbial short and curlies. Also, a really nice way to QA as part of that process. So as a best practice, we're getting more and more of that. Main problem when you come across roofs, from our opinion, and John, feel free to jump in here. If you do go down the road of, look, let's do a complete strip on this roof, you have a whole bunch of tenants in that building saying, oh, I'm going to have to put up with banging and stripping off the roof, and what if it rains once you take the roof off? Do I have to close my shop? You will get tenant complaints, be they school children, you've got health and safety to consider, and nobody really wants to do disruptive works if they're not necessary, and why expose your building to any risk? So you can help mitigate that risk by saying, hey, look, let's start that process. Before we do any destructive testing, let's take some photographs of it. Now this photograph, Bauder did exactly that with us. This is our very, very first infrared picture we ever took on a shopping centre in Birmingham back in 2002. Now I showed this picture to John just yesterday, John, I think.
Yeah, it was.
What you're looking at there, the purple and black area is a huge skylight, and it's very cold because it's reflecting the night sky. The yellow and red and the green area is wet insulation. And John pointed out something to me that I hadn't even noticed in 11 years. And John, I'll let you point out the little yellow stripe, if you may, sir.
Yeah, you can see that on the bottom of the picture, this appears to be the outline of a corner square. My thoughts on that are that there's some kind of break in the thermal integrity of the continuous layer of insulation underneath the roof coverings. And my theory is that that would be a night seal or a day joint where the guys have sealed the vapor barrier to the roofing system by means of a membrane that's bonded to the vapor barrier, goes up the sides of the insulation and seals on top of the insulation. The subsequent roofing then seals onto that. Invariably, that leaves a slight gap in the insulation, and you can perhaps see that that's a small cold bridge there.
Thanks, John. And interestingly, from the thermal point of view, it's worked out very well for the client that that's what's happened, because it has actually stopped the water spreading any further. So in that particular instance, because it was such a geometric shape, we were actually able to spray paint directly onto the roof there and then and say, look, this is exactly the area you need to strip out. And by the way, it came from the joint and the detail around the skylight. So perfect example of infrared being deployed. This is another one. This is a 24,000 metre roof we surveyed. Took about a day or two to survey the roof, but we found the roof was absolutely perfect. It took about 10 minutes to point it at the cladding system and say, whoa, look at all the cladding joints you've got going wrong. Everything you can see in that image, it's a circular building for the MOD, but everything that's light blue, everything that's green, everything that's yellow, red, all of that is water getting into the cladding joints. And that was a situation where, again, landlord and tenant had been in dispute. The roofer had gone grey. He was losing hair by going back to this roof all the time, trying to fix things that were actually, they were okay. So that was a real lesson to be learned. If you've got something that you think is wrong, please call us in early and don't argue with each other for 5 years. Now this one is a belter, as we say in Scotland. We often do before and after surveys. This we surveyed, it's a roof down in Slough. We surveyed the roof, it's about 3,500 metre roof. We gave the client the report. He made a decision to go away and spend £250,000 putting a new roof on this building, and it still leaked. The contractor who laid the roof said, well, if it's still leaking, it must be the cladding. So here's a quotation to replace the cladding. Building surveyors tend not to be that silly, so he said, hang on a minute, I want to do an after infrared survey. Now the shocking thing about this image is this is the after picture. All the defects, everything you can see in that image, again that's yellow, red, green, even the light blue, is wet insulation or interstitial moisture in between the underlay and the cap sheet. The only bit on that roof that is brand new and received the specification, i.e. strip it all off and do it again, is that blue and purple rectangle you can see in the foreground. Everything else is just 2 layers of felt overlaying it. I know, deep gasps all round. And normally when you're in front of me, I will see some surprised faces and some disbelief. It's a true story. We got back on the roof, we took the contractor with us, with the client, with the landlord, with the tenant, and they were forced to cut 2 holes in that roof, 12 inches apart, one in the blue and purple area and one in the light blue area. One core sample was brand new polyurethane, the other was old saturated fiberboard, and it was awful. They had no choice but to go to court and force them to take the roof off. So as a before and after, it's a really good evaluation tool to make sure you're getting what you paid for. The manufacturer in that instance, and it wasn't Bauder, the manufacturer had records that said we have delivered 3,500 metres of vapour barrier, 3,500 metres of insulation, underlay and cap sheet. His records said that job should be correct. The cutbacks on the project did no site supervision whatsoever, and again the building surveyor shall remain nameless. Maybe he's on the line, who knows. But it is a really nice way to validate it and just catch these cowboys. It's also a really nice way for guys like Bauder to say, actually, we've done a great job. There's your roof, day of completion, it's absolutely perfect. You can see the headlaps in green running diagonally across that membrane, that roof rather. That's an Asda supermarket and it's absolutely perfect. The red and yellow thing you can see in the foreground is an air conditioning unit. The white things you can see in the background are actually an adjacent building. So again, if you are maintaining that roof and you're responsible for it for a number of years, this is a brilliant way to say, look, today on the 24th of May, that roof is perfect. Now we can take that a little bit further. This is a job we did with Bauder on a school, I think this one was, but mainly to help justify the new roof. The client was more interested in energy on this particular roof. He had a G rating on his energy performance certificate. He had a very small budget and he needed us to tell him what the ROI was on the roof. And the bottom left of that screen, it's not particularly clear, but we actually showed him by upgrading the roof, he would go from an EPC of G up to E. He would reduce his energy bill by 28% and save £244,000. Now that return on investment just on energy was 10 years. Now with energy prices going up and up, this one's probably about 4 or 5 years old, this case study. So that may well be £300,000 worth of energy now and a 7-year ROI. But either way, what happened was the client was able to use his energy budget and grants to go away and buy a new roof, which is a very weird way to get a new roof, but it does actually work quite well. We've taken that a stage further. Again, because we're getting clients more and more looking at buildings holistically and looking at portfolios in that vein, they're very confused. There are lots of people selling light bulbs, voltage optimization, photovoltaics, wind turbines. It's very difficult to say, look, where should I start this journey? So we're trying to say to people, look, get an infrared survey done at the start and we'll establish where you are today. You tell us what your ideal destination is and then we'll plan a route for you. And this is what this Carbon Dashboard website does. You log into that, you type in your username and password, you call up the building that you'd like to look at, and what the portal allows you to do is change the U-value. So the middle slider on the top there is your roof U-value. So say you have this Bauder salesman in front of you, let's call him John. If he says, I promise you a U-value of 0.1 and I guarantee you'll save X amount of money, what you can do online is very, very quickly and for free validate the words that John just said. You can move that slider and click calculate, and those 3 speedometers will swing round and show you the savings. There's no smoke and mirrors to this. What it's doing is a full legitimate SBEM online very, very quickly for you. If we've got infrared images previously, it's adding in the data we've collated from those images. So if you've got a roof that we're saying, look, it's half saturated, the dashboard will take on board the fact that the U-value is different in the wet area than it is in the dry area, and you will get a nice accurate non-assumptive based calculation done very, very quickly. To give you an idea of speed, it will do a house online in about 0.6 of a second. It will do a hospital in about 5 minutes. So you might have to sit and wait 5 minutes for these little wheels to kick into action. But if the recommendations have an impact on your EPC, you will see it on that screen as well. I've got some stills from a report for you that show what we call a carbon diet plan. So this is a building we've assessed. We've done a complete envelope, all the roof, all the walls. But actually what's come back as advice is said, look, you could change your boiler and your ROI is about 2.5 years. You could then change your roof and your ROI is short for return on investment, is 12 years on your roof. It's 7 years on your wall. It's almost instant on your draft proofing. But what that enables you to do is pick and choose. You can say, well, do you know what? We can do draft proofing that almost free. That's very, very quick. Light bulbs, that's easy to change. You might not get planning permission to change the walls. That might involve a hell of a lot of scaffolding. You just might not have that as an option. So it gives you that choice. Okay, let's look at the boiler and the roof. And again, you might be able to replace both under your budget now that you know where the big ugly lies, as it were. And again, in our reports, we can break that down and say, look, your heating will do this, your wall will do this, and just take you through step by step. IRT's offices, we're all around the country. Some of our guys are dialed in online. We've got a fair geographical spread, so we're never too far away from trouble, from flat roofs. Very quickly, our business model is based on licenses. So we have a few people out there, a few companies who will promote infrared surveys and feed our franchisees with projects. Our franchisees send every image they've got to Dundee, to our head office, where we write reports. So it's a very, very fast turnaround. Infrared surveys have to be done at night time. So when our franchisee is out taking photographs, he then goes to his bed about 2 o'clock in the morning. We start at 8 o'clock in the morning writing your reports. And again, because we've got so many offices, if you have a portfolio of about 50 buildings and they're all in different cities, we're about the only guys in the country who can deliver that quickly for you. So you're looking about usually about a 2 or 3 day turnaround anywhere in the country. The biggest benefit with us, I know we're on the phone with Bauder here, we're on the phone with Bauder because John is an expert in roofing, and I need to stop talking and let him talk a little bit more. We make no money from each other's services. We're both completely and utterly impartial. We do work with Bauder's competitors as well. We're fast, we're local, and everything's uniform, including the pricing, no matter where we are. Key benefit to you guys is it does allow you to put forward the correct spec and show your clients an actual photograph that says, here is the problem, and here's our recommended solution, courtesy of Bauder. So I'd like you to think about it as IRT, we almost give you a headache. We almost say to you, look, you came to us because you were ill. We've diagnosed you and said you definitely had a headache. John and Bauder are more like the aspirin to that headache. And John, I'm going to hand back to you because I'm on to my very last slide, and I'm sure you've got something you'd like to add.
No, thanks, Stewart. No, I think it is a great service that IRT offer, and I truly see the benefits of undertaking thermographic scans of roofing. As I said, we're far often now faced with this situation of somebody promoting an overlay on an existing roof area, especially bigger ones where there are bigger savings to be had. And there's lots of things to take into consideration when overlaying existing flat roofs. And we quite often see the situation where there have probably been overlaid before, or there might be 2 or 3 roofing systems on there, and you could have water trapped within any of those layers that could come back and cause real problems for you. I've seen lots of examples of roofs that have gone wrong over the years that would have truly benefited from thermographic scan. Another one that springs to mind was a large project in Manchester. Actually, there might be some guys from Manchester here. I'll keep the project name under wraps for now, but it was an original mastic asphalt roof that had been overlaid with a 50mm polyurethane insulation and an elastomeric waterproofing system. I was asked to go out by the building surveyor dealing with it to have a look at it after a lot of pushing and badgering, I must say. And when I walked out onto this roof, I was absolutely amazed that it was in such good condition, and yet it was leaking so badly. It was pouring in, but only from specific locations. I did various core samples, and eventually I found an area that was completely saturated. It turned out the insulation that was underneath this roofing system was tapered, and the new waterproofing had been taken over some cavity trays that were in an extensive parapet detail all the way around this roof, which meant that the water running through the face of this brickwork was being directed via the cavity tray straight into this tapered insulation that was underneath the new waterproofing system. Needless to say that there's been lots of other people onto that roof, and we were one of the last ones to have a look at it, and I was very, very fortunate at the time to have found an area that was identifying what was going wrong, and I actually went down and quite cheekily took a brick out of the parapet and proved where the DPC was. Needless to say, the building surveyor was very grateful, but that roof would have truly benefited from a scan. It would have identified where these problems were in a flash. So from my perspective, I really do appreciate Stuart's comment with regard to being an aspirin. I like that. I'm going to, remember that one. We do think of ourselves as being a solution provider, and we've got lots of different roofing systems. And when you get the right roofing solution on the right project, it really does work, guys. And we're talking about roofing systems now that should be good for 40 years plus. What I will say is thermographic surveys help to identify that right situation. So I hope it's been very interesting for you from our perspective. And if there are anything else you want to comment on or any questions, then feel free to contact Bauder by email. You can ask for John Llewellyn. I'm here to answer any queries or questions you might have following this. I'll hand back to Stewart.
Good man. Thanks very much, John. You just reminded me of a quick story myself. We did survey a building, 2 buildings. We did one down in Bristol where the cavity trays were installed exactly the wrong way round. That was a instant, almost you switched the camera on and looked at the parapet wall, and it looked perfect from the inside. Sorry, from the outside, but from the inside, you could see a dead straight line where it was saturated from the straight line all the way down and bone dry on the way up. So we solved that problem again in about 10 minutes on site. It was really simple. But we've seen instances where contractors have run out of decking material and used the door as decking because they found it in a skip. We've found cavities that have been blocked with old pallets and fleece jackets and bottles of Coke rammed in cavities. We've seen weep holes that have been plugged with asphalt. All sorts of weird and wonderful things happen. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope we've not taken up too much of your time. If you would like CPD certificates, then please send me an email just at stewart@irtsurveys.co.uk. It's Stewart with an EW, and we'll get that organised for you electronically. All that remains, guys, thank you very, very much for your time, and thank you, John, for joining us as well. It was your bit was better than mine, sir.
No. Pleasure, Stewart. Thanks for the invite. I must admit, the one thing I have forgot is to give you my email address, which is j.llewellyn@bauder.co.uk, and that's Llewellyn, Llewellyn. And thanks very much, and thanks for your time, all involved. Cheers.
Thank you very much for attending as well, folks. Thank you.